I've been an entrepreneur and a public investor pretty much most of my adult life. And I took to angel investing as a way of diversifying my portfolio and getting into new sectors which may or may not make it into public markets for a very long time. So I didn't want to be a late entrant into new sectors, which is how I got in. Lead investor was a term I learned on the job really as an investor when a couple of companies that I was interacting with as prospects for investment asked me whether I would mentor them. And in that process, one company in particular brought me on this journey of looking for a platform where we could attract other investors. That journey was brought me to LetsVenture, and I had this term of lead investor. And it was very early in my journey, so I didn't really know what was expected of me. But it was a very interesting perspective, which is that suddenly I was in this situation where a fairly new investor in startups was being looked to for some kind of reassurance that this is going to work and it's worth our putting our money into. It was a case of blind leading the blind, but luckily that particular investment worked out very well, and they've had just in the process of closing a round from marquee investors at roughly, I think, 4x to what we invested in. So that's a good return over a 2.5 year period. And I then was very happy to play the same role with another company, which was MyUpchaar, and that proved to be even more spectacular because they went something like 10x in just over a year. I don't really have a thesis in terms of sectors. The only sector that I don't invest in is something which is purely tech for tech's sake, because I just don't understand that. And I have a bit of a bias against something which is B2B, which is related to business processes, because not having been an operational manager for a long time, I don't understand the nitty-gritty of it. I prefer things which have a customer focus. Obviously, they're tech-enabled. Everything is tech-enabled today. So it's got to have a customer focus. One of the big learnings that I've had over the last 3.5, getting on to 4 years that I've been in this startup ecosystem is that as an investor director or an involved investor, because I don't think the director tag is that important, but as an involved investor, somebody who's been a businessman and or an entrepreneur for as long as I have, 30 odd years, has a lot of experience which has now just become part of the way you look at the world. It just seems like common sense. But it's not common at all. And it was only when I started interacting with young startups that I realized that this common sense is not so common. And it has tremendous value for the founder. And you can preempt a lot of mistakes and you can make them see the obvious. Some of it comes from that experience, some of it just comes from the perspective of being an outsider, not involved in the business on a day-to-day basis, and therefore less emotionally involved, more detached, and therefore able to see warning signs earlier and get. But I think there's a lot that you can bring to the table as an investor director in terms of your relationship with other investors, particularly in situations where things are not going so well. You can pool everybody together and bring more talent onto the table. Because the assembled experience of a group of investors, all of whom, or by and large, people who are writing checks quite happily, is quite substantial. So in a moment of crisis, they can bring a lot to the table. I think that's something which I would like to see more of as I continue on this journey as an investor and investor director. You asked earlier how many companies I've invested in. I've invested in 19, I think maybe 20 companies. And I'm seeing exactly the kind of statistics that one reads about, which is that at least 25 to 30% of them are going to go to zero in a few years. And the first one is really, really heart-rending, because suddenly it's zero and there's no option for exit, unlike public markets. But then you realize that's more than made up for by the 1 or 2 who go to 10x and potentially to 100x. And I was lucky in that two of my investments went to 4 and 10x respectively in a very short time period. And so then you learn to practice what the doctors call triage. So you split the companies into 3. One of those where there's no help. You don't waste any time on those. And the second is the companies which are clearly going to do really well. And that's where you can play a tremendous role in terms of leveraging your knowledge and helping them grow. And the third are those which will survive, may never become unicorns or indeed very profitable, and you can have some engagement with them. So balancing those three sort of broad categories is the second major lesson that I've had as an investor. So first of all, the idea has got to seem good to you. I don't think that one is really uniquely placed to assess whether an idea is good or not. And increasingly, both from my experience as an entrepreneur and as an investor, it's not the idea per se. It's the person who implements that idea. So really everything is about the entrepreneur. And in retrospect, I think there are really 3 things that count in an entrepreneur. The first is their commitment, their passion. Passion is an overused word, but with reason, it really makes all the difference. Because when the chips are down, do you continue with the business or do you go to the soft option? Because these are mostly people with good qualifications. Go to the soft option of working for a large company. The second, which almost sounds like it's countering the first, is how flexible are you? So you understand the market, but you have a certain product market hypothesis. It doesn't work. Can you pivot fast? Can you say, this was wrong, I need to go this way, and just completely rejig the way you think about the business and rejig your team, which is sometimes more difficult. Because in the entrepreneur, you may see it, but people one level down the line may not see it like that. So that's incredibly important. The third, which is almost like a hygiene condition, you need to feel that these are people with ethics and who are going to be open and honest with you about what's happening in their business. That's as an investor. As an investor director, the primary thing is a personal relationship. Can you strike up a warm, trusting, personal relationship with the founder? The founder can be incredibly smart, fulfill all of the other criteria. You are reasonably smart, willing to give time. But if you can't find a personal connect, it's not going to work. And if that works, then the combination of an experienced, middle-aged or older like me, businessman with a young entrepreneur with passion is quite explosive. You can actually see magic happen. What you expect from them is what I just talked about. You expect honesty from them, you expect passion from them, you expect speed of execution from them. The way I work with them is by jettisoning all preconceptions of what my role is. So I see no boundaries. I'm not an investor director or an investor or representing other directors. I'm now a partner. I'm a partner who is willing to invest intellectual, creative, and emotional energy in the business. The intellectual is obvious, but it's getting emotionally and creatively involved with the business that makes all the difference. Because I think entrepreneurs are too driven by the speed of execution to bring the systems. They don't understand the value of systems. And these are mistakes that I made as an entrepreneur, to bring systems very early. And the areas where they typically fail in systems are in HR and surprisingly in finance. So they understand money, but they don't understand the role of reporting systems, accounting, reviews, and so on and so forth. So I bring very formal processes into place of business reviews and financial reviews on a predetermined frequency. And as far as I'm concerned, those are then sacred. those timetables have got to be adhered to, which means that I've got to adhere to them as well. So if I have a monthly review, then I've got to make sure that irrespective of my other personal and professional commitments, I make time for that monthly review. And lastly, trying to keep some contact with my co-investors so that in case they can be brought in profitably into the whole process, then they already know who you are and what language you're speaking.